Hello, I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the differences between .r and .rmd files. .r files are files that contain text that is your code only, and they end, that is, the file is saved to your computer with the extension .r. I like to capitalize the R, but it is irrelevant. The capitalization at the end is irrelevant to how the file is saved. I'm going to share my screen and show you an example of that, as well as take a look at .r versus .rmd files and talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each. So my hope is that you'll be able to see both these files. Feel welcome to reach out to me and request if you'd like a copy of either of these files if you are not able to access it. I'm going to start with the .r file because this is what we're familiar with at this point. We're familiar with anything that we want to say in words. We can put after a little number sign to make it into a comment. So I'm commenting code with output. Let's take the iris data and compute the means of the petal lengths. So in line 3, I have an actual line of code plus a comment that tells you what it's doing. But if I put my cursor in that line and either hit run, or on my computer it'd be Control Enter, I'm just going to use the run button so you can visually see what I'm doing. At the bottom of my screen here in the console displays the output, all 150 observations. Similarly, and this pulls me when I hit enter, this pulls me, the interface pulls me to the next line, and I'm going to hit run this line of code, which is supposed to compute and display just the mean. And so in fact, if you were to take these 150 values and compute the average of them, you would get 3.758. Again, that's displayed down here. Similarly, if I've got code that makes a plot, here's a description of what I am doing. Let's take the iris data and make a histogram of the petal lengths. Again, I could display the values. They're going to show up at the bottom of your screen here. However, when I make a visual, a plot of some sort, that's not going to show up in this lower left quadrant. At this point, we know that that should show up over here in our plots. So let's put our cursor on this line, hit the run button, and there it is. It pops up in our not with very nice labeling, but we get a plot and it shows up over here in the lower right quadrant. All right, and just for safety, I'm going to make sure I save what I've been working on. I just had an extra enter in there, but I always like to make sure I save anything I adjusted to my commands out to my .r file. This next file does exactly the same stuff. In fact, you can see those same lines included in lines 22, 24, 30, and 32. But this is now what's called a .rmd document. RMD stands for R Markdown. And there's a little bit of an explanation here. And there's also a nice little link to take you out to some additional references. I've tried to make this pretty simple. That is, I'm going to format this into a document that we're probably all used to, a Word document. And that is the advantage of a .rmd. If we do just a little bit of setup, and in fact, this whole thing is set up that can just be copied and pasted over, we can put in our code, and both the code and output or plots will be embedded into the document. So that's the benefit of using this RMD document. Okay. So remember that everything I did, I displayed the values, computed the mean, displayed the values again, made a histogram. Let's see if I can do that here. And I'm going to adjust this. I'm going to call that plot. And the way I'm going to turn this into a Word document, I'm going to knit it. And what's really nice and convenient about the RStudio interface is it shows us a little ball of yarn here next to knit. And when I say knit, it's going to take the commands I had within the document, combine them with the text I had surrounding that, and knit it, produce a Word document that displays, well, it repeats the command that I put in and then displays the output, repeats the command, displays the output, repeats the command, displays the output, repeats the command, displays the plot. So what this RMD document is intended for is to give a way to have your code and its output wrapped together within a document that you could either edit over here, you could add text and comments, or you could take this output and further edit that document, though you'd have to save it as a separate file. Okay, so those are the main differences between .r and .rmd. Now there's another major point that I'm going to comment on in terms of code blocks. In a .r file, we typically run a line at a time, or we highlight a set of lines and we hit the run button or hit Control Enter to get those to run. With a .rmd document, we organize the code into, I'd call them chunks of code. And you can see every time there's a little arrow, that means there's a start of something. And in this case, it's a start of our code and an end of our code. So let's suppose I wanted to run these two lines. I could do the same thing as I've done previously. I put my cursor on that line, I hit run. Now I've got some more options. I can run the selected line. I can run, I could also run the entirety of the current chunk, or I could run next chunk. So I've got some options. A shortcut way, if I just want to run these two lines, is I can hit the little green arrow over here. And if I hover over it, it says run current chunk. And when I do that, notice that it displays text output down here in the console, but also displays the output after the chunk. And this is going to be important when we get to the plot. In the plot, if I run this chunk, it shows me both the output and the plot. but the plot does not show up over here. So it shows up below the run chunk of code, but not over here. So I personally like keeping things consistent. And so if you really want, which I like to have my plot show up over here. So one way of doing that, and I don't think there is a way of specifically transferring this one line down here, but I can highlight the line, copy it, and paste it down to my console. Now I know this seems weird because it did push it down to our console, but there's some sort of weird disconnect between the output of the .rmd and this little plotting window over on the bottom right. So if I run the command directly from the console, that is down here in this lower left, not up here within the chunk, ta-da, the plot shows up where we're used to having it show up. Now, obviously, there's a lot more going on with these .rmd documents, and we'll talk about those in the future. I very much appreciate your listening to this, and I hope it helped clarify some differences between .r and .rmd documents.